With the upcoming release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there's a lot of excitement to go around. And as someone who has been fairly critical of Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's been said to me by a few people now that I bet you're still going to buy Rebirth. And to be entirely honest with you, I'm not so sure anymore. But one thing that I can say for certain is I'm not excited to play it at all. To be fair though, I'd be lying if I said that Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't get some things right. The characters were portrayed excellently, the voice acting was fantastic, everything looked absolutely stunning, and the story, well, we'll get to that. But here's the thing, in the original game, it wasn't just the characters, story, and cutscenes that I loved, it was everything. The materia, the vast catalogue of items, some of which albeit useless, but nonetheless inspiring wonder, all manner of theories and myths. The optional characters, the minigames, the prizes, the battle arena, chocobo breeding, chocobo racing, enemy skills, morphing monsters for cool loot, the weapons, the side quests, the overall world and how substantially fun and rewarding it is to explore it. Hell, even just mindlessly flying around in the high wind in the hopes that something cool might happen. You see, as much as I love the characters and story, it's all that substance of gameplay which has largely absorbed the literal thousands of hours I've spent playing Final Fantasy VII, all of which Final Fantasy VII Remake has barely scratched the surface of, which is in no small part why I can't be bothered replaying it. As a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, before games could rely on gorgeous, lifelike graphics, voice acting, and cinematic cutscenes to help carry things along, there was a certain beauty to the fact that video games had to ultimately be fun to play. And as video game graphics have advanced, many popular titles have had to evolve from 2D to 3D formulas. And over the course of my life, it's been awesome to experience how many titles pulled this off incredibly well. Whereas it feels like Final Fantasy has progressively sacrificed much of what I loved about the series in the 90s to highly prioritize its visual presentation. The result has been something that perhaps looks better to some people, but for me personally, it's had the inverse effect of making the games feel smaller and less fun to play. It's as though presentation has consumed every production resource, even at the cost of the gameplay itself, to such an extent that there's basically not that much to do but strap yourself into an endless relay of running between cutscenes. And this is to say nothing of the fact that the creative direction of the characters and stories in recent decades has not been, shall we say, especially memorable. Point being, Square Enix just doesn't seem to be capable of making particularly great characters and stories like they used to. And a quick spoiler warning, if you haven't played FF7 Remake yet, you might want to tune out. SE's recent creative output doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence in the fact that this remake series is not a one-to-one retelling of the original story that stole our hearts, but instead, it's a sequel which will effectively retell the same story, just with the freedom to create new twists at the wave of the magic narrative wand that is alternate timelines and multiverse plot devices, a storytelling trope that I personally feel is becoming overused in pop culture and can very quickly descend into storytelling where there's no consequences and therefore no stakes. And so far, they've already demonstrated that they will be wielding this narrative freedom like a club, given the premature ejaculation of Sephiroth's presence all over the initial Midgar section that is Final Fantasy VII Remake, and achieved with all the subtlety and finesse of bad fanfiction. Sephiroth needs to have access to a time machine. Whenever Sephiroth's not on screen, all the other characters should be asking, "Where's Sephiroth?" All of this just feels like a transparent excuse to cram enough fan service and redundant padding into Midgar to effectively sell it as a complete game and justify never having to figure out how to design the outer world beyond it. You know, all that stuff that kept people like me hooked on the original for 25 years. Of course, it looked incredibly beautiful, and the sections where it recreated the original story beats were amazing. But beyond that, it felt like an empty shell of its former self, merely wearing the skin of Final Fantasy VII. And so it seems likely to me that Rebirth is going to follow the same formula of presentation over gameplay. I'm expecting more gorgeous locations that are ultimately empty and tied together in much the same way they were in Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm expecting more padding of the story, many more cutscenes, more new characters that nobody asked for, and more delving into irrelevant characters.
I'm more irrelevant. No, I'm more irrelevant. I'm more obnoxious to give a reprising role. Well, I'm a bigger cutscene drag.
Kids, you're both just awful.
Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully Rebirth is Square Enix's unveiling of a new formula that works to give us the open world that I loved in the original game, all the fun gameplay that came with it, and so much more. But going off of what we already got with Final Fantasy VII Remake, that just feels like wishful thinking. Ultimately, there just doesn't seem to be anything to be excited for, other than the fact that it's probably going to look amazing, which, okay, that's great, but is it going to play any better? Will it actually be a fun game? Will it do anything better, or at least as good as the original, other than just looking better? Because personally, I want more than something that just looks better. I want a great video game. But with all that said, maybe you completely disagree with me. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you'd like more content like this, make sure to like the video, hit the subscribe button. It all really helps the channel out.